and welcome. I suppose there is no harm in starting early. So I will begin by introducing myself. My name is Obinna Obiwulu. I am from the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, CSEA, and I am delighted to be moderating today's discussion on data governance in Africa, pathways for strengthening confidence in the digital economy. So with the increased amount of data currently being collected and the growing need to safeguard national sovereignty and individual human rights over data, countries around the world are grappling with developing data governance rules on how data production and flow should be governed locally and when interacting with the rest of the world. And the crux is to find the balance between encouraging free data flow and information sharing among African member states, and to do so in line with fundamental data rights. So today, to expound on this a bit more, we have a great lineup. First of all, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. We are honored to have the Director General of the World Trade Organization with us, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Welcome, ma'am. To give the presentation, Strengthening Data Governance in Africa, we have the research team from CSEA, comprising Dr. Adedeji Adeniran, the Director of Research at the Center, and Sone Osakwe, a research fellow. Our panelists include Mrs. Judisha Madu, Commissioner, Data Protection Office for the Government of Mauritius. We also have Teki Akwete, who is the Executive Director, Africa Digital Rights Hub. And finally, we have Kamal Tamawa, the Director of Public Policy for Sub-Saharan Africa, GSMA. So welcome, everyone. For our French speakers, there is a channel for translating these proceedings for you on the platform. So I encourage you to utilize this. Without further ado, I would like to invite the Executive Director of CSEA, Dr. Chukwuka Onyekwena, to give his opening remarks. Dr. Onyekwena, you have the floor.
Right, thank you very much, Obinna, for the kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, distinguished guests. Welcome to this roundtable discussion. Like I said, my name is Dr. Chukwuka Onyekwena. I'm the Executive Director of Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa. So we welcome you to this roundtable discussion on data governance in Africa, where we'll be discussing pathways for strengthening confidence in the digital economy. This is part of an ongoing project implemented by CSEA and supported by the Hewlett Foundation, with the aim of driving the implementation of a regional data governance framework that will support Africa's digitalization drive and regional integration. We all know that there's been an unprecedented rise in digitalization and digital technology adoption in most African countries. These developments can bring about life-changing benefits and enormous gains in terms of the much needed structural transformation and diversification of African economies. The recent commencement of trading under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, Free Trade Area, will encourage unhindered data flow across the jurisdictions, prompting the need for data governance rules to guard against privacy violations, data misuse and abuse, data theft, manipulation, unfair practices, as well as exploitation. There is therefore a need to ensure that these rising free data flow and information sharing among African countries are in line with the fundamental data governance principles. And today's roundtable discussion will focus on pathways to strengthening data governance in Africa. We therefore welcome our presenters and panelists from key African countries, and of course, our keynote speaker, Her Excellency, the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, and we really look forward to your insightful discussions. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, Dr. Chuka. I'd like to give the floor now to Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala for her keynote address. Ma'am.
Well, thank you very much, Obi. Thank you, Chuka, Dr. Nyekwenam. I want to congratulate you and CSEA. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, ma'am.
Okay. I'd like to congratulate you and CSEA, as well as the Hewlett Foundation, for putting on this very important seminar or webinar today. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to the panelists in particular. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to lend my voice to this all-important and pioneering conversation around data governance in the African context. I would like to I've already thanked the Center and the Hewlett Foundation, but I want to thank all of you who have taken on this issue of trying to look into how Africa can strengthen its approach to data governance. In Africa, the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated already existing socioeconomic vulnerabilities, weakened economies, and is driving millions on the continent further into poverty. There have been various conversations in recent times on the global stage, many of which I've participated actively in, around the imperative for strong efforts towards speedy economic recovery for African countries. While some immediate short-term remedies such as debt relief were necessary, trade represents a far more sustainable solution to reviving the economies of African countries. Trade and investment is important. A glaring example of the change that trade can bring about is the major fall in poverty numbers in East Asia that we all learned about due to the export-driven growth. Boosting intra-Africa trade and improving the region's integration with the global market has huge growth potential, particularly for poorer countries in the region. And in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, there's a remarkable opportunity for these to materialize rapidly. The AfCFTA can help break down trade barriers, lower transaction costs, encourage economies of scale and value addition for exports. This can make local exports compete better with international comparable products or services and support small business expansion, which in turn means the creation of new jobs, which is something that we're very much in need of on the continent. To optimally harness the potential of the AfCFTA, however, improving significantly on existing data governance frameworks to forge stronger data policies is critical. Boosting the continent's digital economy through this means will improve trade, growth, and development outcomes overall. These discussions today are important in understanding how the intersections between trade, digitalization, and data governance can be used as a development tool to improve the welfare of African citizens. A lot of roadblocks must be surmounted, however, before the potential of trade integration can be guaranteed. For instance, a digitalization strategy for harnessing digital trade is more significant now than ever before, as it provides a level playing field for local small and medium enterprises, SMEs. For this to occur, unhindered sharing of trade data and information is required, as well as policies and infrastructure for reliable digital trade. A focal element of the emerging digital economy is that trade is increasingly more intertwined with and dependent on availability of data or information. Transactions involving people located across multiple jurisdictions can now be executed and concluded virtually. Also, a lot of customs procedures are now reposed online. This increased interface between data and trade has two sides: opportunities and possible risks. For this reason, strategic policies are a necessity. Part of the key aspects for inclusion and fighting poverty lies in how we can use data responsibly. But how do we achieve responsible use of data for increased trade, more efficient business operations, and better public service delivery, and ensure that information sharing ultimately translates to increased welfare, helps reduce inequalities, and that no one is disadvantaged as a result? Governing how cross-border data should flow is therefore a critical piece of public policy and is important for Africa's growth. However, necessary policies, standards, and regulatory capacities are lacking in African countries. We don't have rules and standards that effectively govern e-commerce to make sure we have a level playing field. Currently in Africa, the existing institutions, structures, and capacity required for strategic planning around maximizing data for trade and other developmental goals are inadequate. Capacity for policy making, implementation, and enforcement of policies, and the ability to leverage available information, insights, or value addition is rather frail. What this implies is that exporters and SMEs that operate in such weak data governance environments are at a disadvantage because they'll be restricted from trading with other countries or regions that have stricter or more advanced data governance rules. We must recognize, though, that for many African countries, while the discussions around the prospects of data and digitalization are desirable, it appears to be such an abstract and difficult thing to achieve because of the vast digital divide, and I'll come back to this later. Simply imagining the level of investment and work that needs to go into achieving the right infrastructure and resources to support any regulatory process for leveraging gains from data and the digital revolution can discourage countries from even participating in such conversations. In cases like this, poorer countries are at risk of being left behind, and this can worsen global inequalities. A world where there is inequality in access and use of data is not ideal. If it is possible to get value out of data and use it to improve access to public services, such as education, health, vaccination for children, conditional cash transfers, in a way to positively impact the lives of people, they would feel more included and might be more trusting and willing to participate in data sharing. For the African countries that have data governance policies in place, some have localization provisions that restrict cross-border data transfers, even to sister countries in the region. And whilst there may be legitimate reasons for these requirements, and we know that there's a lot of discomfort worldwide about issues of cross-border data flows, it is important that these policies do not undermine the goals of the ongoing regional trade integration efforts. We must ensure that as we advocate for data governance, it should be done in a manner that is geared towards supporting digital economic growth in the region. It should not be a medium for extending beyond what is necessary governmental powers on these issues. That is why CSEA's data governance project, which focuses on understanding and creating public awareness, is timely. It is only when we fully understand the magnitude of data policy gaps and the resultant risks that these gaps can cause that we can begin to articulate possible solutions and prioritize them. Some of the issues to ponder are: how do we close this digital divide? How do we get African countries to prioritize data governance? How do we build trust? How do we build trust in the data ecosystem itself? How do we guarantee equitable access and use of data? The only way to solve these problems is through a multi-stakeholder approach. Governments, development institutions, citizens, trade organizations, private sector, everyone has a role to play. All stakeholders must get on board. A lot of gaps need to be filled. Therefore, we cannot afford for data governance efforts to continue being fragmented if we must keep up with the pace of global digital transformation. The power of collaboration and cooperation cannot be overemphasized. At the WTO, the need for a holistic approach to the digital economy, including data governance, has been recognized through the ongoing plurilateral negotiations on e-commerce and digitalization for trade. About 83 WTO members are involved in these negotiations, whose aims are to lay the groundwork, the global groundwork, I should say, and ground rules for, to ensure transparency and a level playing field for digital commerce and for digital transactions, which have exploded since the pandemic. It has been estimated, for instance, that in the first year of the pandemic, digital adoption leaped forward on the continent to where it was expected to be in 2023 or even 2024. In a survey of the African private sector done by the Economic Commission for Africa, ECA, 61% of firms surveyed reported an increase in online sales since the start of COVID-19. In addition, 75% of businesses in the goods sector and 61% of micro enterprises identified their top new opportunity in reaction to the crisis as online selling. 25% of African MSMEs, micro, medium, and small enterprises, scaled up their use of digital tools during the pandemic, with women-owned MSMEs demonstrating as much interest in digitalization and digital upskilling as males, as MSMEs operated by males, according to the International Finance Corporation. Nevertheless, as mentioned earlier, a persistent digital divide prevents African countries from more fully realizing the benefits of a digital economy. Internet penetration on the continent is only 28%, according to the Economic Commission for Africa, and only 18% of households have internet access, and only 11% have access to computers. Digital gaps are more significant for women, and the digital infrastructure deficit and accessibility looms large on the continent, but looms larger for women. This is why African countries should strengthen partnerships with requisite international organizations and the private sector to help bridge this divide. Yet only 6 countries on the continent are participating in the WTO e-commerce plurilateral negotiations: Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, and Nigeria. More countries need to engage fully, as the reality is that the digital economy is here to stay, and we must prepare fully for its requirements, as well as prepare to seize all opportunities it offers, especially for Africa's youth. And in Africa's case, a common data governance strategy for the continent can help bridge identified gaps. What is more, having a united front and uniform stance as a region can allow for greater influence in multilateral discussions on data governance issues. Considering that consultations relating to WTO trade rules on e-commerce or on AfCFTA e-commerce protocols are now underway, this session could not have come at a better time. Furthermore, part of this session will see the unveiling of CSEA's Central Repository on Data Governance related issues on the continent, on data governance related issues on the continent. This is a valuable resource for all stakeholders, particularly for building awareness on the prevalent issues, highlighting the level of preparedness and tracking progress. The hope is that the deliberations from today's session would be documented and disseminated to the right quarters to increase awareness and spur further action. Clearly, the data governance approach in the region needs to be upgraded and reformed to fully capitalize on these opportunities that come with data, digital transformation, and trade. In this regard, the new African Commission Task Force on Data Policy and Governance is a move in the right direction. Established this July with partners such as the Economic Commission for Africa, we hope that it will move the continent towards seizing the opportunities that are looming before us. These efforts at the African continental level buttresses the efforts that CSEA is undertaking and that all of you are undertaking today. I therefore enjoin you to be open and to share your concerns and thoughts during this session. If time doesn't permit, please feel free to send in your contributions and suggestions on possible solutions. Africa's youth are on the move. They are on the move digitally. And I believe that a proper data governance framework and strategy will be the buttressing of their aspirations for the digital economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for so thoroughly and wonderfully setting the stage for these conversations and for pointing out how important that they are. That was very, very insightful. And I particularly found the part about women being at a greater disadvantage regarding the digital divide very interesting. Right, so without wasting any time, I would like to move directly to the research team from CC for their presentation. But before that, I would like to encourage participants to drop their names and their organizations in the chat box. So Dr. Adedeji Adeniran, if you are ready, you have the floor.
Thank you, Obi. I'll be starting off and hand over later to Dr. Deji to continue. All right. In the next couple of minutes, my colleague and I, Dr. Deji, will be sharing, just highlighting some of the key points of our very preliminary findings regarding the opportunities around the emerging digital space in Africa, and what that really means for data threats in the region, and how African governments are responding to both the opportunities and the threats in the region. But it's important to know that a lot more investigation needs to be done. But what we really hope to achieve with this report is to increase awareness and to instigate further debates on the issues. Now, we all agree that data-driven technologies hold great promise in helping both low-income African countries and emerging economies in the region to improve the welfare of its citizens. However, Africa is still far away from fully exploiting the potential of these digital technologies or exploiting the potential of data as a resource. But what we have observed is that in the last couple of years, there has been some level of improvement, which spells some kind of hope for the future. I would just want to highlight some of this. For instance, in terms of the number of internet users on the continent, it is still really low, but if you compare where we're coming from, there has been some progress. In the past 20 years, the number of users or people able to access the internet in Africa has increased from 4.5 million people to 590 million people at the moment. So that is some progress. Similarly, in terms of mobile subscriptions, that has also seen a surge, and that has allowed for mobile money wallets to be a lot more common and allows for greater financial inclusion in the region. We also look at the use of online marketplaces and e-commerce platforms. In 2019 alone, we had about 2 billion visits from African users on these platforms. So we see that all of this really is contributing to the growth of the digital economy in Africa. The International Finance Corporation actually estimates that the growth rates can be a lot faster within the next 5 years because of this trend, actually growing beyond 50% in the next 5 years. And that is great. but with opportunities comes a lot of risk. There are a lot of increased cases of data threats around the region. Okay, and that's really because of the ease with which data is now collected, the ease with which it's stored and transferred, just because of the proliferation of these digital tools. And so we see cases like cyber attacks on government servers and infrastructure that actually has far-reaching implications for national security in terms of disruption of public services and just data leaks of confidential information. You also look at the financial sector. There's a lot of incident reports as well, examples of unauthorized duplication of credit card details. In fact, the list really does go on. You have things like online tax fraud, online benefits fraud, and a lot of issues really are happening. And this has economic implications or financial implications. In 2016, the estimated losses from cyber crimes alone in Africa was estimated at $2 billion. By 2017, this had increased to $3.5 billion. And so you really see the magnitude of what this is. But what this has done, I mean, in view of all of these increasing threats, is that it has made African countries sit up and understand gradually the importance of having legal frameworks to govern data, for data governance in the region. It's important to know, however, that the level or the stages of data maturity across the different countries in the region varies. Some countries are much more advanced than others. But on a general note, what we have observed is that the pace at which these policies are introduced, are revised, just do not match up or cannot match up with the pace at which the global data-driven economy is evolving. You also realize that at least a third of the countries in Africa do not even have any form of e-commerce policy at all to protect consumers. They also, these countries also do not have any kind of data privacy rules to govern online transactions. And so this really is a problem in ensuring that the potential of this sector really is exploited. When we also compare the region's performance with other regions like Europe and the Americas, of course, it becomes a lot more glaring how wide this data policy gap is in terms of just even looking at the breadth of coverage and the provisions that are included in these policies. Now, beyond the data policy gap, there's also the issue of having, structures that allow for well-functioning data governance environments. You look at a lot of the countries in the region, and we realize that more than half of the countries in the region actually do not have data protection agencies or their equivalents. And so you wonder, okay, so if there are policies in place, how are these policies going to be implemented? How are they going to be enforced? How is the learning curve going to happen? So apart from not even having these institutions, there's also the issue of capacity. There's a lack of capacity, lack of resources, lack of technical skills, really. And all of these gaps are just very significant when you look at some specific countries within Africa. Another problem beyond the data policy gap and institutional and capacity gap is that the strategy, the data governance strategy being adopted by different countries in the region differs. And what this means is that it does not really allow for information connectivity and free flow of data exchange within member countries. Can you hear me?
Please go on, Sonny. We lost you for a second, or at least I lost you.
Okay. All right, but can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So a third gap that we notice apart from the data policy gap and the issue of lack of capacity and institutions is that there's the issue of having varied forms of data governance strategies in place. And what this means is that it really restricts how data can be shared and exchanged between member countries in the region. What all of these gaps really indicates is that, national data governance efforts are really just not enough at the moment and definitely need to be strengthened. And one way of speeding this up is by having greater regional collaboration. And there are a lot of benefits that this could yield. We talked about the issue of low capacity, especially for poorer countries in the region. And if data governance is being coordinated at the regional level and later being domesticated, what this could achieve is allow for these smaller countries to benefit from knowledge sharing, to benefit from pooling of resources, to benefit from capacity development at the regional level. There's also the issue of, if you look at African countries, individual African countries on the global digital map, we really do play a very relatively insignificant role there. But if we have consistent policy making and a unified stance on the global stage, that could give us greater influence as a region rather than as a fragmented group. And so that said, as much as these benefits are there for having a regional data framework, there have been some efforts in the past. An example is the Malabo Convention, but we see that it hasn't really been very easy to get so many countries within the region to agree on a common goal, act upon it, and commit to those data governance rules. And so that is why we are advocating and believe that because of the structure of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, that some of these challenges can be reduced, and it's going to help or allow for greater regional collaboration in the sense that it's easier to get countries that are already signatories to the Continental Free Trade Agreement to agree on data governance rules and to commit to act upon these rules. And so we are advocating that as planned discussions around the e-commerce protocol kickoff, we're advocating that issues on data governance should not just be brushed over, but they should be given extensive thoughts. And really the idea should be that, or the overarching theme should be to ensure that data flow is encouraged in a responsible manner within the continent, just to guarantee that the economic conditions for the region are improved. I'll now hand over to Dr. Deji to continue.
Okay, thanks, Sonne. Just to pick from where Sonne started in terms of the need for a regional data governance approach. I think the preceding speakers have all highlighted the fact that for African continent to progress in this drive, we need a data-driven approach. And what a data-driven digital governance approach implies is that African and countries needs to understand where they stand in terms of digitalization, digital development, digital approach in terms of their laws, observe these gaps, bridge these gaps, and evolve towards an African or regional best practices around data governance. And this is what we want to see. This is what we look forward to. And in order to do this, we at CC, we are bringing a lot of data. There's a lot of data on data governance or digitalization out there that will be useful in that kind of evolving a very strong, sound, sustainable data governance framework. So this data, we are bringing it together in a single platform to allow everyone to start utilizing this and to ensure that it helps deepen the data framework for the continent. So in terms of our compilation, what we are doing in terms of this data platform, we have actually centralized in a compact way various digitalization data into three kind of framework. Number one is digital preparedness, looking at the social, political, and economic conditions and characteristics that determines winners and losers in digital space. So how much prepared are each country? So with these, countries know their limitations, the gaps in the existing structure. Also, the second set of indicators looked at digital development, which is current state of things or status in terms of the trend in the digital adoption and usage at individual firms and governmental level. And the last one speak directly to the data governance issue, which compile a list of various indicators around data governance, rules guiding digital spaces in Africa, and also looking at both regional and national efforts. So in this slides that I'm showing us, it just shows elements of what I mentioned in terms of what constitutes the digital preparedness indicators, education and skill level, infrastructural readiness, including ICT, energy, and other kind of enabler for digital economic development. Also, regulatory framework is crucial. So also is business dynamism and macroeconomic fundamentals. Also for digital development indicators, we have a number of data that we have actually assembled into this, such as internet connectivity, use of internet, integration of information technology, digital public services, integration of information technology. So all of this, what it tells is giving us an indication of what we are doing at individual users level, at business level, and at government level. The last indicator on the data governance indicator, it's looking at various ways that what we want to see or what we countries in terms of laws and what they have. And we have regulatory enforcement, status of Malabo Convention, cybercrime regulation, electronic transaction regulation, consumer protection regulation, and privacy and data protection, data regulatory institutions. Do they have institutions that in charge of regulating this, and government effectiveness, as well as cross-border data law. So this kind of various data, we've assembled them, and we want I like the fact that these are kind of useful in our discourse around digital economy and data governance, and what is the appropriate kind of framework to evolve going into the future. So to assess this, is just, if anybody goes on CSEA websites, you see a window called programs. If you hover if you hover around that window, you could see that the last icon there speaks to the data governance index. And if we clicked it, we can actually see what is going on in that data platform. So I will just quickly follow these steps, and just shows you what's you should expect to see. So if we clicked on that, it brings us to our website. And when you go on CSEA website, you see this icon called Digital Preparedness. And as you can see, the issue, if you over any country, it tells you the kind of numbers in terms of how developed, how prepared is that country in tapping fruit, or in terms of benefits from digitalization. So the data cover most of African countries. But again, like we mentioned, the issue of missing data and lack of data also is present, because we see that some countries don't have good data to this. But in our studies, in our stockpiling of these data sets, we're able to actually cover majority of African countries. And so when you go around the platform, you could see these various indicators around how country is doing on education, on infrastructural readiness. And just to mention that this platform will be updated regularly, such that new information will be gathered. If you scroll downward, you could see countries doing very well in terms of digital preparedness. And on the top of that is Mauritius, which is #1 African in country in terms of that. And that speaks to a kind of potential that it's not about the size of the economy, it's about the political willingness actually to do the right thing. And we are also very happy to have the person in charge of data protection in Mauritius with us this morning to speak to kind of what are they doing right and what other African countries can benefit. So if you go to digital development, similar kind of indicators like I have highlighted, you could see all the various data and how countries are doing in terms of their digital development. And also when we hover across any country, it gives us these kind of numbers and statistics that enable us to gauge the state of things and kind of gaps in the framework. Lastly, when you go also to data governance, you see what is going on in terms of how many countries have rectified various regional conventions, cybercrime law, regulatory enforcement, and in terms of both threats that are coming to digitalization, both from non-state and state actors, and the kind of issues that we need to grapple with in evolving a kind of very good data governance practices. So I will leave it as this, and I hope we will find this data platform very useful in our ongoing conversation around how best to build trust into data economy that Africans so much aspire as it seek structural transformation and economic development. Thank you, everyone.
So thank you very much, Dr. Adedeji and Sonne. So we will move directly to the questions, but before we begin, I would like to remind participants to drop their questions in the Q&A section. And I would also like to encourage the panelists to answer as many of these questions directed to themselves as they can. The first question is to Mrs. Judisha Madu. Like Dr. Adedeji just mentioned, Mauritius tops the list on the Digital Preparedness Index. So the question is, if you could possibly share policy lessons from your country, and then talk to us about how your agency is able to build capacity and mobilize resources for the work to be more impactful. Mrs. Judisha?
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be amongst you today. And I think the most important aspect in this debate is about expertise, right? And what the country's capacity is about. Definitely, as rightly pointed out, it doesn't depend on the size of your country for that to happen. What is actually very important is how strong is the framework that you have in place, and how is it equipped together with collaboration and cooperation from other countries like Africa and other parts of the world as well. You see, Mauritius has for long been a very early adopter of data protection standards. Since 2004, actually, we started this, the first Data Protection Act in Mauritius. And very recently, in 2017, we have come up with, again, a new set of rules and principles in our new Data Protection Act, which has come into force in January 2018. And we have aligned as much as we could with international principles, such as the EU General Data Protection Regulation, Convention 108, and other principles prevailing in the world right now. But very important to say is that whatever be the actual policies in place, but right now in this COVID world, more than ever before, everything is being put into question again. That is, there is such an urgent need to review what existing principles are, so that it is important for me to say is that we shouldn't be looking at what we have. We should be looking at what we can do right now in this particular situation. Definitely, we have seen how challenging it can be to implement policies, data protection policies, for example, in a COVID situation where exchange and information sharing has become so critical. So the point is if we're going, I think because Africa has been lagging behind, let's put it that way, in many data protection aspects, here comes the opportunity for Africa to be able to develop a new set of principles which will actually correlate with the COVID world. For example, those developed countries which have already have principles in place are now also being called upon to review these principles because the COVID situation has changed everything. So on that level, let's say probably we can be equivalent with Africa and other parts of the world. So this is the opportunity to grab and make sure that we sail in one boat. I always say that regional blocks are very important. Regional policies are very important. But what is more important is harmonization and a globalized approach to data governance. Data being global, there is no other way than to align ourselves, not necessarily with existing principles, but with principles which have stood the test of time and principles which will stand the test of time in the COVID world. So I will stop here because there's so much to say in Mauritius, what is being done. And I guess I won't be able to cover all of it, but that's where I wanted to kickstart the debate. And I will gladly answer all questions that you have with regard to the situation in Mauritius. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Judisha. You did enough for now, at least. So the next question is to Teki, Teki Akwete. In terms of citizens' awareness of their personal data protection and privacy, where do you think we are on the continent? And how much work do you think needs to be done to improve on this? Teki?
Yes, thank you very much. And I just want to commend CSEA for this very comprehensive work that has been done, which is extremely important. In terms of citizens' awareness on data protection issues, I would say that if I have the opportunity to rate it between 1 and 10, I would probably put it at about maybe 3 or 4, and that is to say that it is extremely low, and it is also fueled by some of the factors that fortunately we've had our keynote highlight on. Now, data protection is in a way a very technical subject, if I should put it in that manner, and my experience Ghana's Data Protection Commission also made me more aware of how this dynamic works. So we also have across Africa a huge illiterate population, and that speak in our local dialects. And we have situations where most of these are drafted in English and the terminologies are in English. And so when it comes to awareness creation, what it then means is that you have to more or less translate the laws to the ordinary person on the street for them to understand. And this in itself is a very challenging task. And usually a lot of this task, unfortunately, is left on the doorsteps of the regulators. So the data protection regulators that are not more or less effectively resourced to be able to do this job efficiently. And so that is really what I would say about that. But in as much as we're talking about data protection, we're looking at data governance, I just want to use this opportunity to stress that, you know, it is important, and I like the work that you've done important when we are talking about data governance to not only look at the data protection framework and ecosystem, but to look at the entire ecosystem that is needed in order to facilitate data governance. Of course, data protection is a critical part of it, but when it comes to trust and enabling a trust environment, apart from data protection, you need an enabling legal environment that is recognizing, putting in place adequate cybersecurity laws. You need to recognize putting in place laws that protect consumer rights. You need to recognize putting in place laws that allow for innovation so that our communities can also benefit within this environment. And by that, you want to even look to some extent around how intellectual property rights are being addressed within this ecosystem. So really, there is a lot of work, and fortunately, a lot is still ongoing. But we have to be very proactive. And I'm glad that CSEA is doing this. And I want to use this opportunity to continue to call on other civil society organizations, because I think when it comes to raising awareness with the citizenry, the civil society organizations can actually support and help do a lot more in terms of the capacity building and awareness around that. And that should actually be pushing for at this level. But if I'm coming back from the beginning, when it comes to individuals, there is still a lot to do for our citizenry. And by citizenry, I mean all of everybody involved, all the citizens, not just the educated ones, not just the like of us that are gathered here that really understand and have an interest in the issues, but the people at the very basic levels whose information are being collected and processed, who are in one way or the other interacting with these systems and information, and somehow inherently believe that, you know, we have systems in place to protect them. We need to ensure that we get them all involved in ensuring that we have a vibrant ecosystem that is required to really grow the data ecosystem in Africa.
Thank you so much, Teki. Thank you for that. The final question is for Mr. Tamawa. And my question is, does the private sector have a role in promoting data governance in Africa? And if this is the case, what might that role be? Tamawa?
Thank you very much, Obi.
I'm sorry.
No problem. I'm used to having that done. Thank you very much. I had a couple of slides that I intended to use to sort of guide the feedback that I'll be providing in response to that question. I don't know if I could either share my screen myself or the Secretariat would like to put those up.
Yes, we will handle that from here. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much. Whilst the slides are coming up, I suppose maybe it would be good just to provide a brief introduction of what the GSMA is and what we do, so that that can provide a sort of foundation for and context for the feedback that I'll be providing. So we are the trade association that represents the global mobile industry. We were founded back in 1987. We have more than 750 mobile operator members, with another 350 companies from the wider mobile ecosystem as joint members as well. We have presence in over 15 countries globally, with our head office in London. Africa's regional office is based out of Nairobi. And with the work that we do, we are facilitating an industry that is currently looking at more than 800, almost 900 million SIM connections in sub-Saharan Africa in particular. And we're anticipating that we're going to see some growth to over 1 billion connections by 2025. So this will basically be, in terms of penetration, we're seeing growth from about 77% currently, or rather at the end of 2019, to about 86% by the end of 2025. And out of all of those connections, we find that there's just under 300 million are actually connected to the internet. So this is mobile internet connection. So we're looking in the region of 26-27% in terms of penetration, and we're anticipating that that will be somewhere in the 40% of population range by 2025. And with all of the activity that is happening in this space, we're seeing this industry and what it facilitates contribute about 155 billion US dollars to the economic fabric of the region, and we are anticipating that we'll see that grow to about 184 billion US dollars by 2025, which will represent about 9% of GDP. So in the work that we do, we collaborate with ministries of telecommunications, with telecoms regulatory authorities, with international and non-governmental organizations like the CSEA. What we aim to do is basically try to deliver a regulatory environment that creates value for consumers by engaging regularly across this group of stakeholders. Now, specifically to respond to the question, we have to start first of all by looking at how to demonstrate compliance to data governance laws. And I'm on the third slide by now. So what do we do in terms of demonstrating how we hold ourselves accountable? Because this is, first of all, this is key and critical to building trust in the digital economy. In fact, it's part of a virtuous circle. If the data protection law or other data governance related law says you must not comply with these rules, but you must also devise and implement an effective program to identify and mitigate risks, and also be able to demonstrate that compliance and also demonstrate how you address those risks, that places a very significant burden on the business, but it also brings a lot of reward. It enables the business to prioritize resources to where they are genuinely needed, and they can also be much more effective in terms of how to protect consumers where it really matters. And it also allows businesses that operate in more than one African country, for example, to adopt a consistent compliance posture across different jurisdictions in such a way that suits the business whilst protecting the consumer and also maintaining potential to enhance reputation or give business a competitive edge. So if we go on to the next slide, if you keep this core idea of trust and accountability at the center, this enables lawmakers to formulate their rules in a very smart way that makes sense for the digital economy. We tried to capture the key elements of what makes a smart data privacy law a couple of years ago by looking at examples from around the world, including countries like Mauritius. And we concluded data protection rules are smart if they are based on principles that move with the times. They don't necessarily become stagnant. They have to keep up with the development that I think was mentioned in the previous presentation. They also focus on risks rather than administrative hoops. They provide flexible lawful ground for processing rather than insisting on explicit consent. They apply consistently across all sectors and technologies in a very horizontal way. They are not technology specific or service specific. And they also provide a range of mechanisms to facilitate cross-border data flows, which is has been a recurring theme in all of the submissions that we've received thus far. Now, if you move on to the next slide, we try to answer the question around what does demonstration of compliance look like from a company's perspective, from a company's point of view. We don't always, you won't always be able to demonstrate anything unless you have a holistic approach to data governance, and this will usually start first of all with leadership. So the tone from the top. One of our M&O members, for example, they actually give each of their board members explicit KPIs to lead and implement data governance related programs within the company. Then there's also the area of risk assessment. So you have to implement a privacy by design through the product service lifecycle, assess the impact on privacy and also the likelihood of harm, and then consider privacy and data governance at enterprise and risk level. And then also there's the issues around policies and procedures. So does the company have rules and procedures that staff and suppliers must follow? This is something that we greatly encourage. Transparency, how do you clearly demonstrate that? So we have to find ways to explain clearly when you collect data and why and how it is used and what kind of protection measures are put around the data that is collected. Training and awareness, you have to educate your staff and partners on what is expected of them. Monitoring and verification, so checking that your program is working and making sure that you audit regularly so that you ensure that there are no gaps and loopholes that can be exploited. And then there's putting in place mechanisms to look at responding and enforcing some of the policies that you have in place. So making sure that when consumers exercise their rights or when they complain, you have systems that can pick that up, and also systems to detect and report data breaches and take swift action to remediate. Now, I must say here that the GSMA obviously represents mobile network operators, and it does not operate networks itself or handle any communications data. So really what I've said thus far is really talking about what happens at a company level. But from our part, at the GSMA, at the industry level, what we try to do is facilitate exchange of best practice through various member forums. We promote good practice and accountability as being fundamental, and we try to basically, as much as possible, encourage harmonization at different levels. So to round off, regarding education, for example, it's very critical. In a recent survey that we conducted in several African countries, we found that awareness among consumers of data privacy and their rights was actually lower in countries that already had data protection laws. So clearly, this indicates that there is more work to be done. I think this was indicated as well by Tete earlier on. GSMA does provide some data literacy education programs. For example, the mobile internet skills training toolkits, which we run through our Mobile for Development program, and we run campaigns like We Care, where we try to find platforms through which we can encourage activities around publicity on data protection. And then finding ways for education to also be provided effectively through NGOs and data protection authorities and governments. I think there's a lot of work to be done here. So lastly, if we look at the last slide, just to mention that all of this is very, very important for Africa's digital transformation, its future economic and societal prosperity, at a moment, especially when there is so much political will to drive the adoption of data protection laws. Alignment across the continent is key, and the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, like was mentioned by Her Excellency earlier on, is going to be pivotal to seeing this through. There's so much work to be done towards harmonizing all of the efforts that are happening in many different platforms in the region, so the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, for example, or the Malabo Convention as it's popularly known. We need to do a lot around driving adoption or at least harmonization of our data protection laws along the lines of such efforts. Policy and Regulation Initiative for Digital Africa that's been driven by the EU or PRIDA. There's a lot of effort going on there around data protection. The Smart Africa Alliance is doing quite a bit of work there. Africa Data Leadership Initiative, the African Network of Data Protection Authorities. So there's different platforms that are all having conversations around how to drive data governance and also how to ensure that the consumer is carried along in this conversation. And we have a lot of work to do in terms of driving harmonization of these conversations. And I must congratulate obviously the CSEA for putting this sort of platform together, because the more of these sorts of conversations we have, the greater the possibility of us being able to harmonize all of these individual conversations that have been had in different on different platforms. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kamal. Notice I got it right this time. So we will move very quickly to questions from participants. There are a couple of unanswered questions on the Q&A, so I will take those first, and then participants, please raise your hands if you have any questions. I encourage you to ask the panelists the questions that you have. So the first question is from Chief Anthony Idigwe, a senior advocate of Nigeria. He asks, what is the risk of redevelopment post-COVID, given the levels of literacy and adversity to technology in Africa post-COVID? How would current gains be sustained at the level of individuals in terms of change of behavior and culture? Anyone can answer this really, but perhaps I will throw this to Trudisha.
All right. Thank you so much again. I think this is perhaps the most challenging aspect in the current world today, is how to bring about a change in culture and mindset in data protection specifically, because I think it's very right to say that there is no trade-off to be made between digital trade and data protection essential standards. Let's start to say we talk about only data protection in essence, because there is so many aspects in data protection which goes very complex and complicated, and which might really frighten a new country who wants to adopt data protection standards. This is why many African countries are struggling to be able to understand where to start in data protection. And actually, we all go about seeing what's happening in other parts of the world, and we do copy and paste to some extent, but we cannot come with creative standards in our own jurisdictions. Why is that so? It's because we do not want to change our mindset. We have our own cultures, we have our own economic interests, and we have many other interests that we have to look at after the national security perspectives, everything. Data localization requirements. They are all good principles because we want to protect ourselves. But what we are losing right now is that in protecting these interests, we are forgetting that when data is concerned, the barriers, I mean, the economic barriers, the geographical barriers, they all vanish into thin air. This is the problem in the data world. And if we do not accept that we have to go beyond that perspective, that mindset of protectionism, of trade protectionism, we will be lagging behind in trade enhancement, in trade advance. So this is what we have to see. We have to look at data protection from an individual's perspective. What are the rights that this individual requires in this particular circumstance, situation, and the private sector and the public sector together come to a point where they actually decide, yes, this is good for the individual. We might lose some money in doing that, but in the long term, what we are gaining is actually going to benefit all of us. So this, let's say the triangular approach, private sector, public sector, and individuals' concerns and rights and the voice of the individual are very important. But we know that there is no balance between these interests. We know that the individual is trumped over all the time. We know that the economic interests always prevail. And we know that public sector, government, they have their own interests, as I said, national security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they are trumping over. So what they're doing is they're killing each other at the same pace at one go. And this is where we have to evolve in our mentality. This is where we have to understand that data protection is not about protecting only information. It's about protecting every interest at stake. And the way we devise our principles will reflect that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Judisha. So the next, Kamal, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to supplement that response a little bit as well, just to add, I mean, beyond just the data protection aspect as well, there are other elements, and I think Chief's question is actually very poignant, because indeed there is that risk that there's potential water relapse to happen, considering the antecedents that we've had in terms of connectivity prior to COVID. It will surprise you to know that currently in sub-Saharan Africa, there is over 80% coverage in terms of access to a mobile broadband network. So 80% of the population is within reach of a mobile broadband connection in the region as at the end of 2020. But out of that 80%, only 28% is actually connected. So there's 53% of the population that is within coverage of a mobile broadband network, but they are not connected to the network. And this is for a number of factors. Obviously, there are the data protection risks, but there are a number of other issues around affordability of being able to gain access, the relevance of the content online, the digital content, things like how that content is relevant to people's lives on the ground. There's questions around digital literacy itself and whether people are able to even understand how they can gain access. And beyond that, where people are actually even able to gain access, there is always that concern around protection of the data that people are able to gain access to, and also people are able to contribute to online content, because at the end of the day, online content really is content that we provide as well. So it's the challenge is multifaceted, and we will, I mean, it's a very big problem that we probably will need to break down into bits and pieces to be able to address one after the other. I know the focus of this particular forum obviously is the data protection aspect, but just to highlight to Chief that indeed, there is a big problem there, and it's one that we will need to face head on, because prior to now, the focus really has been a lot more on investing on deploying infrastructure to provide access. But at this point, we are able to tell that the problem is no longer an infrastructure related one, but really more of an adoption and a more demand side related component of an issue. Thank you.
Yes.
Right. Thank you, Kamal. So before anyone else hops in, I'd like to say this. While we hope to have as robust deliberations as we can manage, we also have to be mindful of the time element. So let us keep our responses concise and to the point, so that we don't stay longer than we have to. Techie, it appears you have something to add.
Yes, I was just going to say that in order to consolidate the gains, governments will have to be very deliberate. First of all, governments must recognize the gains that have been made, and they have to be very deliberate. And because, as Kamal has noted, the issue of the digital divide is still there, and it's very relevant to what is happening. And so in order to consolidate the gains, we need to recognize that we've left some people behind and bring them on board and push for more policies that can enable us, benefit from these gains that have been achieved.
Right, so thank you very much, Techie. I will move on to the next question. It's from Mark Herringer, and he asks, is there an aspirational open data policy from a Ministry of Health to review? Who would like to take this on? Kamal, is this something you would like to take on, perhaps?
Judisha has a hand up.
It's fine.
Judisha, I didn't see that. Please go ahead. I apologize. Okay. Please go ahead.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to mention that we have such a framework in Mauritius, because we have an open data policy based on the World Bank model, which we have in place for quite some years already. And it has been implemented in the public sector across, including the Ministry of Health. And that could probably be something that some people could look at, because it came to our office, we vetted the whole process, and it's got the data protection standards in that policy as well. So I just wanted to share that. Unless you have other questions, I will just stop here for Kamal to answer. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Judisha. Kamal?
No, I think for want of time, I think let's just go with Judisha's resource. I think I can't say any more than that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kamal. So another question is from Chukwuma Okoli, Dr. Chukwuma Okoli from Enugu, Nigeria. And he asks, how is corruption or lack of it undermining or enabling data governance in Africa? Are there any safeguards? Again, I throw this open.
Okay, I think, yeah. Corruption is a canker to everything in Africa, and so isolate the data governance space. And indeed, it is even going to be worse if we do not take deliberate efforts to address these. And what I want to say on this platform is that, in a way, I think that if we do not, in our approach to dealing with data governance, address the challenge of corruption, and corruption can come in various forms, including interventions with including, putting in place effective regulatory systems and all of that, if we do not take deliberate efforts to weed it out, it creates even more problems. In the data ecosystem, as we have seen, there are a lot of drivers. And I must say that within the African context, a lot of the time our governments do not necessarily have all the powers in place to really, find and put in place measures to regulate these environments effectively. And so if we allow corruption to take seed, we're going to get to a place where, we're going to further weaken our governments. We're going to further weaken the abilities to be able to our citizenry. And I think that the challenges that will come with corruption in this space is actually going to be worse than what we have experienced in the past if we do not take deliberate efforts. So corruption is key, and that's why in putting in place enabling legal environments, we must also put in place structures and systems that will help minimize the risks that are associated with corruption, for instance. So when it comes to appointments of regulators, how are we doing it to minimize corruption? How are we enabling the citizenry operate in a very transparent environment and to be able to see corruption issues and then address them in an efficient way? How are we putting in place structures within the court systems to allow it to address loopholes that come in place? And so we have to look at these issues holistically, but unfortunately, we cannot isolate corruption from this environment as well. But I must also say that the uniqueness of this environment is that if we approach it effectively, especially with tools such as data protection regulatory environments, we can to a large extent some levels of corruption when we leverage on requirements around transparency and openness as well.
Right, thank you very much, Teki. So before I move on to more questions from participants, Dr. Adedeji, I'd like to throw this all-important question to you. How can the African Continental Free Trade Agreement assist data governance in Africa?
Okay, so thank you. So African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is like a step in Africa drive towards regional integration. And you would agree that there are many type of regional integration, including economic integration, trade integration, and the rest. So having a kind of laws or protocols that guide in that process is crucial. And if you know, we have PIDA, Program for Infrastructural Development in Africa. It has one component, ICT. So there is this kind of litany of kind of approach to bring the continents together. But we need to build bridges, we need to build infrastructure but we also need laws to connect us better in kind of seeing ourselves as a unit rather than dissipate kind of 54 small fragmented countries, but a single unit. So that's what kind of regional integration does. And that's kind of why we need, when we talk about regional integration, there are many elements to it. And one of that element is the data governance that African Continental Free Trade Agreement, because when you look at African Trade Agreement or FTAs globally, one element that is increasingly added to it is the issue around e-commerce and digital trade. And those are elements that we can also describe as data governance. So if we strengthen the governance framework in this aspect, I think we can move it to a more center stage. And it can propel like an impetus for a conversation around what are we still missing. If we get it right with digital trade, if we get it right with e-commerce, what are we still missing in covering this gap in data governance? And I think those are kind of things that we think regional integration can help to spark in terms of progress.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adedeji. Judisha, I see that your hand is up.
Yes, thank you so much, Obi. I just wanted before to comment on the corruption aspect, if you allow me. You know, definitely, Teki also pointed out, I think it's very important to know that data protection standards do address corruption concerns. You see, the data protection mechanisms that you implement, like privacy by design, data protection impact assessments, all the procedures that are, you know, in data protection laws, they actually counteract the disadvantages that corruption brings at the very outset of a project. And you can actually detect whether corruption is taking place in regard to if you implement the right data protection standards. So definitely they are interlinked. Corruption, data protection, they can be addressed at the same time when you're implementing the standards, the right standards in data protection. And with regard to the AfCFTA, if I may also briefly comment, is Mauritius is participating also in that process at the level of the African Union. And I think we are going in the right direction together with the platform that you have created. We will be able to produce the right agreement with the right standards incorporated in this agreement to make data protection something which is worthwhile. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you very much,
can I comment a bit on
by all means, Teki, go ahead.
Yes, on the AfCFTA issue. So Africa Digital Rights Hub is currently undertaking research looking at 5 countries' readiness, and these include Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda, Kenya, and South Africa. And one of the things in terms of their digital readiness to embrace the digital economy in the light of the AfCFTA. And one of the things that we have noticed, which I thought it is actually important to bring to fore, is the transparency around all of these things. And because current the policies or protocols around data governance from the AfCFTA is clearly not out. Informed on it. However, we're also quite informed that they are very far in working on protocols that is enabling physical trade. And considering the importance, you know, of the digital economy, the space that we are in, even with the physical trade, I think that it is very important that we start having some level of conversation around the importance so that we do not separate the digital from the physical trade and infrastructure, because they go hand in hand. And I think these are some of the conversations that we really need to start having. The second issue about that is that a lot of protocols should be made public. And governments, it's about time we start having the conversations at the governmental level around the key issues that needs to be made ready, because all the countries are talking digital trade, but we are not. When you look, we actually had a roundtable with India, and there was a situation where one young tech industry player had an opportunity in another country, and they were not able to take advantage opportunity because there were physical barriers to them, you know, participate in this opportunity that has been presented. And happening a lot and stifling innovation and growth within the ecosystem. So some of the things that I believe that we really need to be looking at, because a lot of businesses are already ready to take advantage, especially the small and growing businesses. But sometimes the impediments in the way, you know, stifles a lot of this innovation and growth.
Thank you very much, Teki. So to our participants, there are over 100, welcome. Some of you have raised your hands in the course of these conversations. So I encourage you now to raise your hands if you have questions. So I have Onyekpado Udodiri JP, we will let you in now to ask your question. Okay, while we wait to sort that, I will ask a question from Ikechukwu Sebastian Asogwa. And his question is, data governance is key to every economy, to every economic policy building, but the uniqueness of the African economy must be addressed. He asks, how do we put all forms of data for unified governance at the center? For example, data for an economic purpose is not the same with the judiciary, medicals, and other sectors. Does anyone want to take this?
Okay, I can take it. I think it first has to start with classification, and it has to, classification can only come with an understanding of countries, and even at the continental level of we are as a country. So every country has to come to that realization themselves and to look at themselves and their economies and to say, you know, identify areas that are meaningful to them and how they want to participate in the digital economy. You have to classify your data. And I believe that once we're able to classify the data, it actually minimizes the challenges around, you know, it minimizes the complexity of looking at this whole data ecosystem, which is very broad. And that way we can single out ways of participating, and then we can have rules of engagement when it comes to the specific types of data. And I must say that if you look at it in that context, it actually enhances or makes it easier to also share data within certain spaces and to also provide protocols for engagement. So for instance, if we want to share medical data, we associated with it, and then we provide particular protocols around how to engage on that. If you're looking at identity data, you can define specific principles. So it's that is, you know, classification of the data systems within the data ecosystem is also extremely important. And we must put in a lot of effort to do that.
Obi, may I just
Please.
jump in?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I would also like to add that for classification, for digitalization to happen, classification is essential. We cannot go on computerization and digitalization if there is no classification and the appropriate segregation of data. This is very important to understand. And in Mauritius, we have developed the Info Highway system, which now is internationally recognized system, where actually the public sector shares data across departments and other sectors. And definitely classification is very important in that channel. So it provides a highway, definitely the name is highway, where actually we can make data travel within Mauritius and also across Mauritius abroad. So it's a project that you can see for yourself how it works. And it's a very nice way of communicating between departments, and digitalization, I think, happens also that way. That is very important also to know. And also I would like to suggest that, you know, first of all, let's put it that way. If you have a messy kitchen, you need to put some order in the kitchen. You need to put the utensils in the right place. For data as well, you've got so many categories of data, and you need to put some order in all these categories of data to be able to understand the value of each and every data that is in your possession. Until and unless you don't do this and you rely on the physical environment, then there is no way, there is no prospect for digitalization to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Judisha. Before I come to you, Kamal, Dr. Adedeji, you had your hand up earlier, or has it been answered what you wanted to say?
Oh, okay. What I just want to mention is the issue. I mean, when you raise, how do we approach data governance? I think the sectoral way needs to be highlighted, and I think speakers have mentioned this. But just to add the fact that when we talked about compartmentalizing data into different, I singular rules cannot apply to all kind of sectors. So you can't allow the rules, I mean, for financial data and health data and put the same thing on maybe Facebooking and the rest. So those kind of element of differences needs to be there. But even at that, we should recognize that a way to harmonize data or bring the advantage from this kind of having large data is very strong. And that will be crucial to Africa. If you look at artificial intelligence and in terms of the amount of data it needs, very few African countries could actually generate this kind of billions of data in order to train this kind of robotics and AI in order to do better than they are doing. So in that sense, we need to recognize the uniqueness of each sector, but also need to recognize that at some point in time, how do we then evolve a structure that recognizes this, but also bring together kind of limitations that might be present in the African region in terms of very small countries with high digital divide and exclusion.
Thank you, Dr. Adedeji. So Kamal, before you go ahead, I'd just like to point out to everyone to please, as I mentioned before, keep our responses brief so that we keep to the time. And Dose Susuga, I see you, one of the participants. You've had your hand up for a while. I will call on you right after Kamal speaks. Kamal, you have the floor.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to further buttress, I think very important what Durisha and Teki said in terms of the need to compartmentalize some of the data protection limits that we put around data that comes from different sectors, especially as we're moving into a very big data-driven environment. You know, we're getting, things like, mobile consumer data being combined with data from the health sector and data from the financial institutions, for example, blended together to say, for instance, address pandemic-related issues. So there is that need to obviously look at protection limits for data that comes from different sectors. But I think, like Deji mentioned, it's very important as well to look at it from have a sort of helicopter view in terms of putting laws in place that recognize the need for this compartmentalization in the first instance. And that's why I think I mentioned in when I was mentioning approaches to data privacy, the need for there to be principles that move with the times, and then also principles that focus on risks rather than administrative hoops. So there is the need to have that compartmentalized view, but it's important for us to also have a broad helicopter view when we're developing laws, such that this is taken into context whilst designing and developing those laws and regulations.
Thank you very much, Kamal. So Dose, you may speak. Remember to unmute your microphone. Dose?
Alors, bonjour tout le monde, c'est Dose Susuga. Bon, je pense que le problème de la gouvernance des données, c'est un problème vraiment crucial pour l'Afrique. Et vous savez que dans tous les domaines, quand on parle de l'écosystème des données, c'est dans presque dans tout. Mais la culture des données n'est pas inculquée dans l'éducation de la population africaine. Donc, c'est un domaine qu'il faut vraiment, il faut renforcer la capacité des gens pour pouvoir réussir à bien canaliser les données, pour pouvoir réussir les systèmes de numérisation. Sans ça, sans cette capacité, ce renforcement de capacité, ça ne peut pas réussir. Donc, je peux dire que tous les experts ont parlé, c'est très bien. Ben, avant de faire la gouvernance, il faut connaître. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Dose. Maintenant, en parlant en anglais, mais Kamal, tu peux dire?
Je peux répondre en français, Obi? Je peux répondre
oui.
en français, Obi?
Ah oui, s'il te plaît.
Merci, je pense que ce serait plus facile et on va aller un peu plus vite, si tu me le permets. Oui, Monsieur Dossé, vous avez totalement raison. En fait, quand nous, on avait débuté à l'île Maurice dans la culture de protection de données, la première chose qu'on avait fait, en fait, c'était de développer un curriculum pour l'école primaire, secondaire et tertiaire. Et là où l'éducation sur la protection des données est faite, et en fait, je ne peux pas vous dire qu'on a réussi totalement à inculquer cette éducation dans tous les niveaux, les sphères de vie, de la vie mauricienne. Mais ce qu'on a pu faire quand même, c'est une éducation de base en ce qui concerne les enfants, les étudiants, les jeunes et aussi la population âgée. Donc, on a fait cette initiative et ça se fait toujours. Et il y a aussi à l'université, au niveau universitaire, des modules sur la protection de données qui sont instruits dans nos institutions. Donc voilà, définitivement, ça aide à renforcer la capacité. Donc, définitivement, la source, la fondation, c'est bien l'éducation. Merci.
Merci, madame.
Merci to say. So I'd like to remind everyone, participants, that we have a resource for French speakers on the platform. So if you were to click on that, you would hear all of these proceedings in French, and you could ask your questions there in French as well. Do we have any other participant with a question, or should I ask another that has been put on the Q&A? Okay, Taiwo Akerele, you have the floor. And please remember to unmute your microphone. Right, it appears there is some difficulty getting Taiwo on, so I will ask another question from the Q&A. This one is from Shamira Ahmed, and he says, given the heterogeneous nature of Africa, how does the significant geopolitical influence of the EU, China, and the US in Africa, who have different data governance strategies, including cross-border data flows, influence unilateral data governance strategies, and ultimately continental harmonization efforts? I see you have your hand up again, Judisha. Please take this.
Oh, sorry, Obi. I'm sorry, I didn't follow your question. I was answering to the chat. Can you please repeat the question?
Okay, so the question is, given the heterogeneous nature of Africa, how does the significant geopolitical influence of the EU, China, and the US in Africa, who have different data governance strategies, including cross-border data flows, influence unilateral data governance strategies, and ultimately continental harmonization efforts?
Okay, thank you. You will be surprised when you look at all these frameworks outside Africa that they all have many similar principles on data protection. Those divergent principles are actually, I would say, the procedural aspects of data protection. But concerning fundamental human rights aspect in data protection, actually you will see that across from China to Asia Pacific, a European continent, and any other parts of the world, even the American perspective to some extent, they have similar data protection standards. So the point is that we have to extract from these diverging frameworks, as we put it, the similarities where actually it cuts across race, it cuts across continents, it cuts across everything to bring together what we call the human being aspect in data protection. And that is where we have to really focus and put them in practice into Africa as well, so that at the end of the day, as I said, data is global and there is no other way out. So data, if you look at it, if you look at data protection laws, for example, they are technology neutral. At the same time, data is, let's say, all these things aspect neutral. That is, it belongs to the human being. AI, all the technologies that we are talking about, they address similar issues. But the human mind definitely is different. The human mindset is definitely different in any country. But we cannot address all of these issues in data protection in laws. We cannot. It's not possible. That's why we always have to aim for open-ended principles, holistic approaches, and also these aspects which join together all individuals in one basket. It's not possible to always make differences between us. That is where I think it's very important to understand. Taking into account the local context, the national context, yes, we do have to take into account, but the most important aspect is not the local context. The most important aspect is how Africa trades with the world, is how Africa is being able to handle data which actually belongs to Africa, but at some point in time will be shared with the world. This is the perspective that we have to look at data. And this is where definitely common standards do apply, and we can inspire ourselves like Mauritius did from the EU GDPR, the Convention 108. Why we did this? Because we understood that there are principles there that we need to inspire ourselves from. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Teki, you have the floor.
Yes, so Africa will no doubt be influenced by the world outside because we are trading and we are constantly interacting with the world. And so that influence will be there. But one of the things that we also have to be mindful of and we need to recognize is the fact that Africa in itself, within itself, is very diverse. And we are very diverse from the legal system perspective, from even language perspective. Internally within our countries, there's that diversity. And so we should not talk harmonization without recognizing that diversity, because that has always been the challenge to any unifying front that we present a continent. Without recognizing this diversity, it's extremely to get everybody on board. And so it's very important to look at that. And in order to address harmonization effectively, I believe that we should not just look at harmonization from the perspective of uniformity, but from recognition of this diversity and the uniqueness of us as Africans and our respective countries and legal systems, and to focus on building the necessary bridges, because that diversity even comes in when you're looking at our economies, when you're looking at the various levels of development between different countries and all of that. So in order to address these issues of harmonization, we have to look, of course, at the external issues, but we also have to look at it from the internal perspective. And our focus should not be on uniformity. And by uniformity, it doesn't necessarily have to be that because Mauritius has the same law, Nigeria has to have the same laws, because that is start facing challenges. But we have to look at, within the laws and the systems and the structures and we're promoting, where are the issues, where are the things, where are the principles that bring us together, and how do we use these principles to build bridges that enable us to collaborate effectively among ourselves. I think that would be the key in addressing these. But we can also take this decision, and I agree with you, Dacia, outside just alone isolate ourselves, because we operate in the global system, and within this data ecosystem, you cannot, operate on an island. You have to operate in the global space as well. So we have to recognize all of these factors in order to ensure that, we cooperate efficiently.
Thank you very much, Teki. I would like to remind participants to unmute their microphones when they are called upon to speak. The next question is directly to Kamal, and it is from Esmeralda Bali. Esmeralda asks, I note that there is no basic standard data breach. For instance, there is no law that states the minimum protection against data breach that a company or organization should inculcate. This implies that the protection is not foolproof. Is it possible to liaise with regulators to improve on this? Kamal?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Esmeralda, for that question. And I think this is where it's important to have those laws in place that do not necessarily remain stagnant and continue to move with the times. We need to continue to be able to identify new risks and have laws that are adaptable to addressing those risks. It's also very important to have those laws that can apply consistently to all sectors and technologies in a horizontal way. Whilst I might recognize the fact that there might not be specific mention of what limits there must be in terms of what can be termed a data breach, but I do know that there are quite a number of data protection laws that are specific to addressing what action needs to be taken as soon as a certain level of data breach is concerned. I see Teki's hand is up, and I suppose she's going to supplement that a little bit, and also Dudisha maybe for the fact that she controls some of these data protection laws. But I do know that there are the laws contain enough provisions within them to be able to address these sorts of instances.
Thank you. Teki?
Yes, thank you very much. So I wanted to supplement it to say that it is very deliberate that these laws are not specific. I mean, 10 years ago, what was considered as adequate cybersecurity is no more the case today. And if you are using laws to legislate in the technology in a very strict manner, you will realize that these technologies will overtake the laws and the laws will be obsolete. So there's a deliberate effort in making sure that the laws are not very specific, but create a system that allows, or a set of principles that allows and gives room to regulators and industry at the highest industry standard possible at any point in time. So that's just what I wanted to say.
All right, thank you very much, Teki. So we will start to round up.
Obi, I just want to add one element to this.
Go ahead, Judisha.
I do understand the time constraints. I think it's very important for me to say that it's the way, effective data protection laws are designed. They are designed in such a way to cover any mishandling of personal information, personal data, and any breach which is related to personal information is actually covered in any data protection law. So I think maybe I didn't get that question very well, but there is a misconception here. No, any mishandling of personal information should be covered in a data protection law. And that is the purpose of having a proper law. So maybe I didn't get the question right, but I just wanted to highlight that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judisha. So we are going to be rounding up. As such, we will take only a few more questions, but I think the deliberations have been very productive so far. This question is from Korede Ologun. And he asks, protecting data integrity is key for Africa because of the uniqueness of each country split along regions. Supposing we achieve a unified database, perhaps in a segmented approach, how do we protect the integrity of the data away from manipulation and distortions, such that policies drawn based on the data are not counterproductive? Would anyone like to take this on? Please go ahead, Teki.
Yeah, I can try. So I think that, what we are striving for is not a centralized database. I believe in itself poses a very huge risk to the risk and to whoever is contributing, you know. So the idea of a data ecosystem is not for a centralized database, but to create an enabling environment that allows, you know, for the utilization, use of data in a very fair and consistent respects fundamental rights of people whose information is also shared. And that is what we should strive for. The objective is not everything at a particular source so that everyone should come and take out, but the objective is to share when sharing is necessary, and to share whatever minimum is required to enable us achieve whatever objective is necessary point in time. And that comes back to the earlier issues that we raised around classification and the importance of compartmentalizing data, because that is what enables us do that. So we should, you know, move away from that idea that we need to have a centralized database, because I think in itself it increases a whole lot of risk, and even, you know, can put at risk and jeopardy the very things that we're trying to drive with the need for a data ecosystem across Africa.
Thank you very much, Teki. So I am going to take one last question from the participants, and then beyond this.
Sorry, Judesha has their hand up, sorry.
Judesha, so the problem, your background is the same color with the icon for the hand.
How I got it, sorry. I will change the background next. Sorry, I just wanted to highlight is that in any data protection law, including Mauritius, you have what we call provisions on having appropriate technical and organizational measures in place to protect data. And this is so broad-ended that it covers any aspect of protection of data. So whatever data you're concerned with here, you have to protect the data with the appropriate measures. So this is at the basis of any data protection law. And in Mauritius, if you breach any provisions of the Data Protection Act, you are actually committing a criminal offense, which is very specific and particular, because Mauritius actually does not have administrative sanctioning in the Data Protection Act, but has it outside the Data Protection Act in the Civil Code and other normal courts procedures. But we have overemphasized the sanctioning in Mauritius by including the penal system, the criminal sanctioning, which is very serious in Mauritius. So if, for example, someone does not have the right measures in place to protect the data, actually he's committing an offense. So I just wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Adedeji, you have your hand up.
Okay, so just to add to the conversation in terms of, so uniformity is not what we should advocate for. However, if you see some of the modalities in terms of modalities for, so there are 5 operational modalities governing African Continental Free Trade Agreements. And one of them is about the platform for retailers and wholesalers to actually put their information around, so there will be a unified database around that make it very easy for people to trade. There will also be a unified kind of system around the digital payments. For example, I was speaking to a trader in Nigeria, and he mentioned how difficult for you to actually buy or make digital payment between Nigeria and Benin Republic. So those kind of obstacles are there. So what I just want to emphasize is there are kind of minimum that we need to also, even though there is no uniformity, but there is actually minimum. My rights, my digital rights in Nigeria, I think in some instances, there should be something that we covered under that. There should be minimum that no country in Africa should go below. But above that, every country can innovate in terms of what is really, really appropriate for their context. And it's about actually knowing when we have to have that minimum standard, area of uniformity, and area of kind of differences that we can actually evolve a good data governance practice.
Thank you, Dr. Adedeji. So I will go on to the final question. Beyond this question, if any of the panelists has an area they feel that we have not touched on and that they would like to speak on briefly, I will allow that. So the question is from Joan O. It is the role of digitalization in trades and boosting of economies is vital. However, the ability to effectively protect data is essential. We have seen various breaches by some African governments or leaders despite existence of laws and paying of lip service to pertinent issues. How can we ensure data breaches are detected, investigated in order to ensure efficiency and gain the trust of international organizations willing to trade with Africa? Teki, you have the floor.
Okay, so yeah, okay. So one of the things that I will say is that compliance or ensuring of compliance is very important within this ecosystem in order to ensure trust. The biggest challenges that I believe our regulators, and I'm looking at the regulators broadly, not just the data protection regulators, face within this ecosystem is enforcing the laws, especially governments that end up setting them up, you know, because a lot of the time these laws are not set up to give the institutions as much as they are required to have in order to have a very strong hand against government agencies and the like. And so we have to really, on that note, we really need to look at the role of the courts and the civil society organizations to actually facilitate compliance by governments to these systems. Recently, during the COVID in Ghana, an executive instrument was passed by our government, you know, that essentially required the sharing of data of phone subscriber information with a third-party organization for purposes which included COVID. There was a huge risk to it. A number of people took it to court, and the court ruled that it actually violated the right to privacy. And these are really important. So even beyond the regulatory agencies, civil society organizations and individuals will continue to have to call on governments, especially when these laws are violated, because sometimes, rightly so, the hands of the regulators are tied in ways where they are not necessarily able to push for enforcement. So we have to look to other systems, including the courts, to actually push for enforcement of some of these laws.
Thank you very much, Teki. So did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Dudisha, you had your hand up?
Yes. No,
okay.
No, actually don't put it because you don't see it. I'm just waving my hand, which is much
All
better.
right, that works.
No, actually, I think it's not, we have to understand that it's not enough that we have data protection institutions in our countries, that we have laws, that we have enforcement procedures, that we actually have all the relevant institutions in the country. It's not enough. We require, for example, for Africa, that the African Union, yes, the African Union is right now doing a lot in terms of data protection promotion, and I fully appreciate this. But these are the organizations, including other regional powerful organizations which impact a particular continent. They are the ones who can actually drive the right perspectives in data protection in the minds of African leaders and governments. Because without this intervention, without this regional intervention, data protection will remain just like any other aspect in human rights in a particular country. And to be able to really bring the impact that it needs right now in terms of data governance, we need the collaboration and the inspiration of the African Union and of regional like ECOWAS, SADC, et cetera, who are the right drivers to inculcate the right education in the minds of African governments? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judisha. So I will ask just one more question from Taiwo Akerile, and he asks, how much is the average African country investing in data collection and management on an annual basis? Would anyone like to take this on? It's a very specific question. Dr. Deji, you have the floor.
So in terms of looking at two types of data, the traditional conventional data that the statistical agencies try to collect, I think we are doing very low in that. There's a number of data like the statistical capacity annually produced by World Bank, and it's clear from these indicators that African market and most of the data in terms of also survey and large data sets on the continent comes mostly from investment from multinational institutions. So this we need to do. But that's actually one of the advantages of the new digital economy, because these are produced and access to it is mostly at the private sector. And this can also help and support policy making. But how do we harness this kind of new dimension in data collection is important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adedeji. So I'd like to ask the panelists if anyone has any final word. Is there anything anyone would like to add to the conversation before we get to the close of it? You can indicate by raising your hand. If no hands are raised, we will move very quickly to the end. Okay, Kamal, I see you have your hands up. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Obi. Maybe as a final comments from myself, I just wanted to supplement the question before the last, with the responses we received from Teki and Dodisha to say that beyond just looking at implementing laws where they currently exist, I think there needs to be a lot more effort in countries where we currently do not have those laws to develop those laws, because we're still at a very poor level in terms of having these laws developed in the first place in the region. I think we're still somewhere around half of the continent, or somewhere around that figure in terms of how many countries actually have laws for data protection. So there needs to be more concerted effort towards helping or encouraging the more countries to develop more laws, and also ensure that lots of these laws are harmonized. And this speaks to the second and final point that I intended to make, which is around making sure that the laws that we have in place are going to encourage e-commerce by making sure that free flow of data across borders is possible. There is this very protectionist view around data that is generated in countries, which we really need to work very hard on towards getting countries to move away from. If we have the right laws, the right regulations, the right frameworks in place, it is very, very possible for us to generate data that is going to be very, very useful to developing our economies. And by our economies, I mean the African economies. And in doing that, we need to ensure that it's very possible for data to be able to cross across borders, such that it has impact basically across the region in terms of the economic benefit. So that's I think is
all right. Thank you so much, Kamal. So I'm going to do this in sequence, and I urge you to be brief. Teki, do you have a final word?
Yes, I think that my final word would be that in order to look at data governance, we look at the entire enabling environment that will work within the data ecosystem in Africa. And that means that, both at the country and the continental levels, we need to look at the technology and the infrastructure issues that affect this ecosystem. We need to look at the legal and regulatory environment totally. And by talking about the regulatory environment, we have to look at the data protection laws. We have to look at the cyber. We have to look at the electronic transactions laws. We have to look at the intellectual laws, as well as the regulatory ecosystem that can support that. And then last but not the least, and this cuts across both the technology and the legal enabling environment, is the capacity which is required to build this ecosystem, the human capacity that is required. And so I just want to use this to say that in order to ensure that all these factors, these three critical factors, come together efficiently, we all to recognize the role that all the stakeholders play, so private sector, government, and then civil society organizations, and even to a large extent the citizenry as a whole, in ensuring that we are able to meet what is required to drive this agenda for a digital economy in Africa forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Teki. Thank you. Mrs. Judisha, you have the floor. 1 minute for your final note.
Thank you so much. I think we should not be too pessimistic as well. It's very important to be optimistic concerning the foundational aspects that have been laid in Africa to promote data protection, to promote human rights as well. It's very difficult for our continent to be able to come up with and compete with other continents, that's for sure. But definitely data protection itself being complex, we have to appreciate that it's not easy for the African continent to be able to produce something which is going to be marvelous. That's why I believe small steps are always very important. Like, as I said, the African Union has started with the AfCFTA, the Digital Single Market, the PRIDA project, the Malabo Convention, the Regional Personal Data Guidelines, the Model Law of SADC. We have so many documents that we can use, that we should promote, and we should also bring in with other African countries so that they come up and make their comments on these documents as well, how they can be improved at the regional level. And this is going to bring together collaboration and cooperation, which is the most important aspect here from a practical level. It's not only about talking legal enforcement, etc., but from a practical level, if all the countries could come up together and talk and try to collaborate and cooperate, that would be a very important step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judisha. So to cap it all up, Dr. Adedeji Adeniran, do you have anything to say?
From my end, I just want to thank everyone, the panelists, for this very wonderful discussion. I mean, personally, I've learned, I've been educated, and I think the future in terms of research and policy on data governance look very, very bright on the continent. And we can only just remain optimistic that if we can take this passion forward, we can actually rebuild trust, and we can have a kind of Africa that we aspire to have in terms of digital development and development itself, I mean economic development itself, not just people being on Facebook, but actually seeing development in terms of standard of living. So thanks to everyone for this useful contribution. And I think from our end, we want to say we are serious about this. We've taken this contribution, both the responses, questions that were not responded to. We want to take this forward in our work, add these many dimensions that have been missing into the conversation, and work together with you in order to see how this evolves into a good and better practices. Thank you.
Awesome. Right. So we have now come to the end of these deliberations, and I would like to thank everyone for these very vigorous discussions that we have had. I would like to thank our panelists, Teki, Judisha, and Kamal. I would like to thank the presenters from CC, Dr. Adedeji and Sonne, and I would like to thank Dr. Chukwu Konyekwena for being a gracious host. Thank you to the participants as well. I must apologize to the ones amongst you who asked questions that were not responded to. We are going to get round to the questions, but I urge you to engage us on social media and follow the conversation. Let's keep these conversations going. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.